It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. This is Freeman Michaels without Barnet Bain. Barnet's away again, but when Barnet's away, we can invite other friends to come and play. And that, in fact, is what we've done today. Our dear friend Katherine Woodward Thomas is here again. And if you have tuned in the past, you know a bit about her, but I'm going to tell you folks who are tuning in just now a little about her. She is, of course, the best-selling author of Calling in the One. She's a licensed therapist. She's the co-creator and co-leader of the Feminine Power Transformational Courses for Women. She is the creator of the Conscious Uncoupling 5-week program to release the trauma of a breakup, reclaim your power, and reinvent your life, which is what we'll be talking about today. Katherine, welcome.
Oh, it's so nice to be here.
It's always such a blast to have you in studio. Now, what our audience doesn't know is we actually commute together, so we get to come into the studio and hang out for a bit. So I'm full in Katherine Woodward Thomas mode right now. And we've been talking, of course, about this incredible new project.
Yeah, so here we are to continue the conversation with our friends.
It's an important conversation because I've been divorced, as you know, and, you know, one of the things that occurs during a divorce, it's so traumatic and it's so dramatic. Our lives as we know them come apart in so many ways, and there's so much to navigating those murky waters that I'm so excited that you've created this program. It's so important.
I have to tell you, I just have to admit straight off the bat that it was something I had so much resistance to, because it really is getting right into the belly of the whale as far as I'm concerned.
Of course.
There, as you're saying, there's so much agony and so much pain. And, you know, I'm known more for helping people get into relationships than I am for helping people get out of relationships.
But that's exactly right, because these are two sides of the same coin.
Well, it's interesting because that's one of the things I say is your next relationship doesn't begin when you meet your next lover. Your next relationship begins right now with how you end this relationship.
Oh, that is so right. That is absolutely right.
And we saw that in the Calling in the One process, because we've taught now thousands of people all over the world, and it just became so apparent and so clear time and time again how incomplete people were from former love affairs gone bad, or, you know, bad breakups. And in what we saw is in the aftermath of a bad breakup, very often people would begin to live diminished lives.
Yeah.
Their hearts would contract.
Yeah.
They would make decisions like, I'm never going to love again. I'm never going to be hurt like this again. Or they'd make decisions about myself. I guess it's true I'm not really worthy of love, or other people get to have love but not me. And so they stop taking risks. They really shut down the field. 20 years later, 20 years later, they're talking to us about, okay, I really want a relationship, and why am I single all these years? And they'll trace it back, and they go, oh my gosh, I shut down.
Yeah. Now let's jump in with both feet. So here's my own recovery. I'll use myself as an example. The story that I constructed at the end of my first marriage. Now, I've been married twice. I'm with my second wife. We've been together we've been married for 10 years, but together for 12 years. But in my first experience, I paid a price for the story I constructed, because I constructed it. Mainly to defend myself and to feel better about whatever it was that was coming apart in my life. Not just the marriage. So many aspects of my life were coming apart at the time that occurred, that the divorce occurred. And I held on to that story, and I got other people to collude with me on that story. And today I can honestly say that I don't buy into the story I created. That's not typical. Most of us create a story
and we stick to it.
Yeah. And I guess the question is that story you created really working for you? So what I think the offer is to help people craft an interpretation or several interpretations perhaps. I don't know. I'm going to let you lead me into this.
I just love your humility. I just want to say, I think it takes so much humility to reflect upon your own PR, you know?
That's right.
Because basically the story, and I can guess the story,
It's a mess.
was blaming the other
you have
person,
no idea.
like completely
Yes,
victimized,
totally.
completely, you know, justified in your perspective. And it was a way that you devalued that person, you dismissed the value of that love connection, all of that stuff. So these are some of the mistakes that we really identify in the conscious uncoupling process, the mistakes of how we're breaking up. And they're pretty much across the board and in the collective. You know, I mean, it's just kind of typical. You call a girlfriend when you're, you know, breaking up, and all of a sudden, you know, the good girlfriend position. He's a jerk. He doesn't deserve you. He's just such an idiot. Dump the idiot.
This is the colluding part. I did this.
Right. This is what we all do. This is like good friendship, right? But what you're doing in the meantime, in feeding into, and so it's what we call the first mistake in that we want to avoid in a breakup, is moving into hating our former partner. We call it going from soulmate love to, you know, soul hate. Soulmate to soul hate. And so, you know, it really is. And it's us trying to come to terms with the loss. And it's interesting. There's a wonderful anthropologist who I admire so much named Helen Fisher. She says that this tendency that we have to hate our former partner is kind of, she calls it an evolutionary relic from the past. It's this very primitive way that the emotions kick in to try and help us separate.
And you know what's almost more dangerous about this? You know, it's interesting you bring this up because I got to be a little careful because these are folks in my life today. Okay, I'll say it this way. How do I say this? I'll say it in generic terms. It's very common for men and women, but this I'm talking about a woman. This woman, whom I know, is surrounded herself with a bunch of man-haters out of the experience of the divorce, and she's feeding this thing. And my wife and I were talking about it recently, how, you know, it's so hard to watch her create this club, if you will, and they're all hanging out together, perpetuating the story, and they're all meeting these disastrous future projections of the same story.
Right.
It's such a bad bargain. I don't know if that was English what I just said.
It's a very bad bargain.
Yeah.
No, it's a very bad bargain. It's a tremendous, first of all, inside of that indulgence, to just move into the indulgence of these primitive knee-jerk emotions of soul hate.
And all the folks you have to get in your club, the colluders, you're drawing in folks you probably don't want to be hanging out with.
Well, that might be true too.
Yeah, it's a mess.
But you're doing a lot of damage. You're doing
Yes.
a lot of damage to the other person, to any children that might be involved, to your
that's absolutely
community.
true. Yeah.
You're doing damage. You're pulling on people to have to choose and to limit their, you know, love for people. It's disloyal to have love now for your former partner, all of those ways. And it's actually very diminishing. It's like going from a positive bond and making it into a negative bond. So you're still actually bound to your story in that relationship. You're not free to create new love. You're not available to actually go out and find a new partner that's going to be a happy story. Inside that, you can long for that. There's a difference between actually longing for something and being ready to really receive it into your life.
Yeah. And I think the other piece is there were so many beautiful moments with my first wife that in the position I took, I didn't get to keep those. And I want those. And I want to actually recognize what aspects of the relationship were working so that I can bring those to the next relationship. Because the idea of just dismissing the entire relationship as a mistake or as bad, that's not helpful. And it's not accurate either. Because so many things were awesome about my first marriage. It's just at the end of the day, we weren't mature enough to be able to, you know, check ourselves and you know, look, I'll tell you, there's a huge part of me that got projected onto my ex-wife. She played a role for me in my own personal story. And if I don't own that, then I'm likely, and I did, to go repeat that. And, you know, that's not helpful.
Okay, so now you're getting into the
I know, I jumped in
second.
with both
No,
feet.
it's great.
Oh, good, okay.
What you're saying is awesome.
Yeah.
Like your level of self-responsibility. You're such a great role model for all of us.
Oh, bless you.
I really appreciate it.
Mm.
But the second mistake that we're making is that we're blaming our partner. And I think we get really snagged there because there were probably other things that she did that were kind of crappy and bad and wrong and hurtful and unconscious and all those things. So we get really, that's where our attention goes, is what the other person did or they didn't do, and we'll stay there. And then if we try and take self-responsibility, we might go to the other extreme, which is blaming and shaming ourselves.
Oh, we can do that too. I did that plenty. Sure.
I'm sure, right?
Not helpful.
And it's not helpful because it actually stunts development. And what you're talking about is, how do I learn through this experience? How do I keep the gold from this experience? How do I reflect upon myself as the source of what happened in the relationship in a way that's going to better equip me to be a better lover, a better partner?
Yeah, it's about constructive interpretations,
Right.
versus these destructive, defensive ways of viewing things that then limit our potential. Because if we have to lock everything into that, then that's the place we keep tripping. I mean, this is a huge thing. I think one of the unwinding pieces, compassion for myself, compassion for her, where we were in our lives and what we met up over, and all the fantasies we played out, and all the disappointments that we projected onto one another, and all the ways that we worked out our own scripts. That's taken years. I know this is going back, let's see, we divorced in 99, so this is a long time ago. But to see it with that level of dimension is a gift, versus locked in, again, as we were speaking, to those myopic interpretations that in some way help us feel better, but they don't really. Yeah.
Well, so I also want to point out that there's something beautiful about what you're saying too. So there's empowered self-reflection, which is a constructive way to engage the inquiry into yourself as the source in a way that's going to promote your own growth and evolution.
That's fantastic.
But you're also talking about looking at your overall story around love and intimacy.
Absolutely.
And almost casting people into certain roles, baiting them to play those roles, and then being completely victimized when they show up that way.
And if I'm honest, I still do it. The only thing is I kind of laugh at my roles. I mean, when I play victim in my marriage, it's a choice. I'm like, wow, I'm fascinated that I went there. Like, we're really going to play this out. It's interesting because Jazz and I talk about this right now. It's 3 minutes. So in the past, we would start a pattern and it would go on for hours or days or weeks or who knows. It went on for a length of time.
Right.
Now when we do it, it might be longer than 3 minutes, but the joke is it's 3 minutes. Like, was that 3 minutes? Can we stop now? Did we do that long enough to be able to now begin to own what that's really about for us?
Wow. So conscious.
Yeah.
So conscious.
Well, on a good day.
Well, on a good day. Exactly. And that's where
All
we are
bets are off.
collectively, is really striving to be that conscious of
Yes.
our own consciousness. But
Yes.
that's the marvel of our time, is that we're really the first generation who collectively we can actually step back and notice the consciousness that we're swimming in, what the assumptions are that we're inside of, what's the story that we're running right now, what are we generating, what are we creating.
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because here's where I see a major flip it kind of opportunity. When we see something in a negative sense, then we can kind of flip it and see the other side so it has dimension. What an opportunity a breakup is.
Thank you. Well, it's actually one of the most profound opportunities to transform your life that there is, which is why I ultimately decided I needed to bring forth this program.
I'm thrilled.
Even though I had resistance, like, I don't want to be the breakup guru because it's such a painful experience for most of us. But there's something about that tender time when life falls apart, because it's not just that you're losing the external structures. You're actually losing your whole worldview in very many ways.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So it's not just that you're dealing with like the disappointment of maybe betrayal by that person, or how they've, let you down, or, that you're seeing things about them. It's also this feeling like life has betrayed me.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Because suddenly in a breakup, it's like everything that you counted on, everything you saved for, everything that you assumed was true is very often upside down. Night is day and day is night. It's such a disorientation. So there's different levels of trauma in a breakup that we talk about in the program. And I liken it to, nobody wants to break their leg. Nobody wants to do that. But if you have broken your leg, you actually have to reset the wound in a particular way. And
That's so
you
smart.
have different levels of breaking in the wounding, and nobody wants to be in rehab, but you've got to actually do the work. You have to assess the break, you have to set the break, you have to make sure that you're going to, doing your exercises so that it all goes well and it heals well, and that's when the bone can actually become stronger in the place that it broke originally than it was even before the break. So that's the opportunity of a breakup. But there's an efforting to that process. So there's different levels of trauma, and all breakups are a trauma. And we liken it to a fender bender breakup, which is maybe when you're dating for
3 months.
Yeah,
okay.
3 months. You were fantasizing
he was a
the
nice
wedding.
Guy. She was
It
a
was
nice gal. Right.
You're starting to try on couplehood, and you're
Right.
liking it, and you like the predictable Saturday night thing. So it's not a huge trauma, but it's a big disappointment.
Right.
And you're losing a fantasy, and you're losing the sweetness of that connection. And there's definitely the stages of grieving that you're going through. Then the other extreme are
All right, I want to do that. But we got to take a commercial break.
Okay,
we're going to pay a couple bills. When we come back, we're going to talk about
Okay.
those big crashes, and we will in just a minute. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. And welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. This is Freeman Michaels here, without Barnet Bain, but joined today with my dear friend Katherine Woodward Thomas, a friend of this show, an incredible transformational leader who is doing some powerful work right now about conscious uncoupling. And this, of course, is how we deal with breakups. And the vantage point, and we talked about this in the first segment, is looking at it as an opportunity and realizing there's a tremendous potential in going through this with a different kind of sort of observer, different kind of inquiry process that ultimately will lead us further towards what we do want in our lives. Before we went to break, Katherine, you were talking about there are these sort of fender benders, these sort of little breakups where we had hoped something was going to work, but it wasn't massive. Then we have more massive breakups. And I'd like to go right to that, because this is where we really have some deep-held stuff to work through.
Well, and that's where our worldview crashes.
Yes.
That's where you think somebody was your best friend and your lover, and you could completely count on them, and then you find out that he or she's been having multiple affairs, or they just stole $30,000 out from your bank account, or or they have another family somewhere that they didn't tell you about, like really severe, total car wreck kind of crashes where every bone in your body feels broken and you're just laying up in traction, what just happened. So that kind of breakup not only kind of divorces you from that person suddenly, but in some way divorces you from life, because we move into, very often mistrusting life and mistrusting ourselves. I remember, years ago, a breakup that I went through, I was so shocked. I don't think I prayed for a year. I was just so disoriented about life. It was one of these kinds of breakups.
Yeah.
And when they're just bad like that, they actually feel like life has betrayed you.
They do.
So it's how to recover and to midwife. When you're talking about how do we turn the worst thing that ever happened to us into the best thing that ever happened to us? What's the opportunity of a breakup, and why is it that we actually want to get in there and have a system or a way to work with ourselves during a breakup that will midwife the next stages of our development? And first of all, before we even go there, I just want to talk about why we don't have that.
Okay.
Because if you look at it across the board, we kind of don't really have a protocol for how to do this well. And as we said, even our conscious friends, and and I know everybody listening to this conversation, your audience is very conscious.
Yeah, but this is the triggering one. This is one that cuts
and
so
we will
deep.
We will still.
We'll default.
He's an idiot.
Yes,
She's
we'll
a
default
jerk.
to that.
You deserve
Absolutely.
so much better,
Yeah.
And so we'll all kind of go into that, because we haven't really seen a better way. We haven't really collectively aligned on why this needs to go well. And I think my theory about this is that inside the happily ever after myth, which was created about 300 years ago.
Yeah, the Prince Charming one?
The Prince
Happily Ever
Charming,
After, yeah.
and they live in the
I know all
castle,
about it.
and it's happily ever
Yeah.
after. That's kind of in our collective of what we're all aspiring to.
Oh, and it's
kind
so
of the
reinforced. It's
standard.
every movie. I mean, like every romantic comedy
Everyone.
is boy meets girl, boy can't have girl, but boy gets girl. They overcome the obstacle, they end up together, and the movie ends.
Right.
You never hear about the heavy
And they're-
lifting.
Yeah, and they're happy.
Yeah, you
and-
never hear about 10 years later when they're divorced. What happened between them there? How did it become
Right,
what it
exactly.
became? Yeah.
So what it is, it's this collective covert standard of what it is to succeed in
And
a
fantasy.
relationship.
And fantasy.
Right, so inside of that fantasy, if a relationship ends for any other reason other than death, it's a failure.
Right.
It's actually a failure of love.
Versus a learning opportunity.
Well, or the relationship perhaps fulfilled upon its purpose.
Oh, that's a good point, too.
Okay,
Yeah.
and
No, it's
in a
really good.
world where so many of us are called to evolve at
Yeah.
the level that we are, and we need relationship in order to support each other to grow and evolve, there are going to be those unions that choose to uncouple
Yeah.
because the relationship is completed and fulfilled upon its purpose.
Okay, now this is something that brings forward a fundamental piece about conscious agreements versus unconscious agreements. And I don't want you to lose track of where you're going, but I got to say this because it's so important. You know, my stepson, who's now 22, came to me when he and his girlfriend were going through some tough times. He actually has since split from her. And he wanted some feedback about, he said, you know, I thought we were committed. I thought we were going to stay together. And he referenced my wife and I, Jasmine and I. And I said, you know, it's interesting, Josh. We aren't committed necessarily to staying together. We're committed to 28 things that we believe is our best chance of staying together. And this is derived from a course we did, a Harville Hendricks course we did on Imago work, where we create a vision for our relationship, where there were statements about what was it that we were creating or co-creating. Wow. And it's interesting, whenever we've been really challenged, before we go to bed, we take out that statement sheet and we read them. I read one, she reads one, back and forth. And it's such a call to remember, put back together what it is we do agree on. What's the conscious agreement? And then what's interesting is it cleans up a lot of the trailing bits, because the truth is what we're doing and how we're acting and the choices we're making, are they in alignment with what we say we want? Because if they're not, then we have work to do. And that's a different spirit of what we're doing. So we're not just standing at the altar and saying, yeah, for better or worse, sickness and health, which is all fine. I mean, we've been through a lot of that, the two of us. But there's something else. It's not just stay together forever because we said so. It's we're committing to something that's conscious, that's a conscious agreement versus these unconscious kinds of, stuff about what a man's supposed to be, what a relationship's supposed to be, all of which substantively is likely to come apart because it doesn't have that foundational piece of what is it we do want, what are we projecting forward.
Well, and there's also this element in listening to you that there's an understanding that both of you have that it's a relationship that you need to generate.
Yes.
And I think inside of these old fantasy, these old myths of what relationship is supposed to look like, we think it's just about like the form. Oh, okay, I'll get married now, and now I have it.
Oopsie-daisy. Yep.
Without remembering that we have to actually generate connection, care, deepen love,
Yeah.
and really make an effort to grow ourselves together.
Your friend, Marianne Williamson, likes to say, it's the Holy Spirit's laboratory for our maximum growth. That's what a committed, conscious relationship is. Yeah. We understand all this stuff is going to come up. We understand that all my, conditioned stuff about what a woman's supposed to be and what a man's supposed to be, all of that is going to get, at least in this moment in time, at least in my life, it's gonna bump up against my experience not matching up that way. And that's the testament to who and what I am as a evolving person, is not when things are yippee skippy, but when things actually, don't match up with my fantasy. And I've got to now be more real and be more human and move into a deeper, more intimate relationship with another human being who shows up with all their stuff.
How dare they?
How dare they? Doesn't she know the role she's supposed to play in my life? I was sure that if I found the right woman, right, happily ever after.
Right. So you what you're talking about is the need to really be an evolved an evolving human being to maximize the potential
Yes.
of the love that's between you and Jasmine.
Mm.
Because if you could still be with Jasmine and have a much lesser relationship, right?
That's a great point. You know, we did this New Year's show, and that was a lot about it. It's like, wow, this year, can we go deeper? And I said on air, I said, look, you know, me, you know, having connections with people I know and maybe I'm friends with or even barely know, that's easy. Going deeper with my wife, whew, that's hard.
Wow.
Because there's a lot at stake. I depend on her in so many ways. And look, we do lock into routines and patterns. It's so easy to do. And I think it's normal, but that we actually take stock of like, wait a minute, is this choice that we've sort of unconsciously slipped into really serving those 28 things?
Mm-hmm.
And often it's not.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, and you just said something I don't want to skip over. I just want to point out what you just said, which is it's hard to go deeper with her because I'm so dependent upon her.
You bet.
And I think that this is a little off topic of conscious uncoupling per se, but we're talking about becoming conscious and waking up. And one of the things that we actually need to do, I can actually tie it back into this, we need to stop pathologizing the end of a relationship. We need to have it be a viable choice that's filled with dignity. And it's also because we devalue single people in our culture. It's very covert.
Oh, that's
but
a
there's
great point.
But there's a very strong
Yeah.
feeling that people have if they're going from being a couple to being single, like, oh, now I'm a member of the loser club
Oh,
again,
yeah.
or, you know, oh, what's wrong? You're not partnered, and everybody's scrambling to find you a partner, like something's terrible about that. So there's like a lot of covert messages that we're getting in the culture.
This is Pandora's
that
box. This is so rich.
I know, it really is. But what you're talking about is that on some level, unless you're willing to risk losing the relationship, you can't have a happy,
bet.
healthy relationship because you're going to dim down, stop telling the truth, start skirting around things that need to be engaged in order to really have a vital, happy, healthy love life.
Yep.
Yeah. So this whole thing, it's very deep. How we're holding relationships, this way of pathologizing it inside of a myth that was created when the lifespan was 35 years old. Okay, now I have to just say, I say that figure. It was very, people did live until they were 40, till they were 50, till they were 60. But we're looking for love when we're 70. We're looking for love in our 80s now. Like, we got a lot of vitality happening.
Well, and you and I both believe that we're evolving in consciousness, that the species, that there's a whole way in which, this has been developmental. At one stage of our, as a species, at one stage it was very appropriate for there to be very tightly held roles and so forth and so on. It's fine.
If you trace back when divorce became a sin, it wasn't a sin for a very long time in the Catholic Church. Catholic Church couldn't care less. You lived with people, married them, didn't marry them, who cares? It had to do with the Catholic Church, Rome wanting to, I think it was about the year 1200, Rome wanting to have an influence over the royal marriages so that they can control the political spectrum of what was going on. And so they figured out if they declared divorce as a sin, then they could start to have more control over the monarchies and the royalties of Europe.
That is wild.
But you start to see, and then the influence of that, and you look even at the laws that we have in our country. Divorce laws are all about somebody's to blame.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of like these very foundational levels of structures and consciousness that are kind of feeding into this very shame-based assumption that if your relationship ends for any other reason other than death, it is a failed relationship.
Right. When the reframe is, it was perfect in the sense that it's what we needed to go through. And the evidence we have is because that's what happened. And to the degree we can do that consciously, it becomes a tremendous opportunity to unlock what is it about that relationship that worked? What is it, the pieces where I have my own triggers? How do I own as much as possible? And then more importantly, what do I really want?
You know what? I just want to state up front, I am an advocate for commitment.
Yeah.
I'm an advocate for committed, monogamous, conscious relationship. And the reality is that over 50% of first marriages, over 60% of second marriages, and over 70% of third marriages end in divorce.
Well,
okay, so that's the lived experience. So I think it's time that we actually learn how to do this well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Logistically, it's a good point.
It's going to save our children a lot of therapy when they grow up.
Well,
you know?
there's some divorce attorneys, though, that are really not, that might
Those
lose,
are not
lose
my
a
biggest
couple.
fans,
But,
right? Well, actually, conscious ones are. There's a lot of really good people who actually want.
No lawyer jokes. Yeah. But I think the question is what we're committed to. And look, unconsciously, a lot of us are committed to replaying the same scripts. I mean, you and I both know that. And the trick for us is to recognize that we have the opportunity, especially in a breakup, to rewrite the script, to really own it.
So let me share a little bit about the conscious uncoupling process, because it's a 5-week process, and I figure you can take 5 years to just kind of mosey your way there,
right?
And you can be crying for 3 of those years and overeating for 4 of those years.
How far do you want to go with this?
Being promiscuous for 5 of those years. I don't know. Why not?
Yeah.
Or you can actually really devote yourself to a very conscious process of 5 weeks. And
willing to work. Willing
to do the work. And that's actually the third mistake I'm just going to mention, is that we have this myth that time heals everything.
Right.
Time diminishes the acuteness of the agony you're in, but time does not actually set the wound. That would be like if you broke your leg and you didn't go to the doctor, you didn't set it in a cast, you just said, well, time will heal it.
Yeah. No, and the other piece of time is, if you're telling the story long enough, it gets locked more and more in place. This interpretation that may or may not be in your best interest. If you tell it long enough, you get enough people to clue with you. It's harder and harder. Exactly. It's harder and harder to give up.
Right.
Give up your story early. That's the best way to go. Or at the very least, let's put it this way. Let's say dimensionalize your story. So, I always say it this way. There's a part of me that feels this way. There's another part of me that holds this. And Barnet and I have said on this show, if we get enough stories floating in the air at the same time, we break through the stories entirely. We enter what we call the third story, which is no story at all. It's all the stories. It's both all the stories and none of them, because we dimensionalize enough where we're not locked into a single interpretation. We need to take a quick break. I want to come right back because, obviously this is such an important 5 weeks, and I want to talk about what's in those 5 weeks, but we'll do that after the break. So stay with us, because we'll be right back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. And we're back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Katherine Woodward Thomas today is sitting in for Barnet Bain. And I, of course, am Freeman Michaels. We're talking today about conscious uncoupling. Before we go any further, I need to mention the website. Folks, if you're interested in Katherine's work, it's www.artofconsciouscompletion.com. Of course, this and all of her information will be available at the Cutting Edge Consciousness website, but I want to get that in. Okay, so let's talk, Katherine, because I love that you said you can do this in 5 years, you can do it in 5 weeks. How do you want to play this? How dramatic do you want to go down? Again, some of these heavily scripted sort of patterns of behavior. You mentioned eating, you mentioned, how much suffering do you really want to go through? Or are you willing to do the work to sort of own it and look at the parts you played? And this, by the way, I want to be clear. This is not about New Age guilt. Our friend Carolyn Mays talks about this, and it's tricky that we say, what part of me created this situation? That is a true statement. There's a part of you that, yes, did, but there's another part of you that didn't. And, the other person is responsible for a part of what they brought to the experience. And so I don't want to layer that in too heavily, but it's worth noting that it doesn't matter. You can still own the circumstances of it and step into the circumstances fully. That's a place of empowerment without taking it on as shame or that I should have done something different or any of that, right?
Absolutely. It's beautifully said. And I so appreciate that, because I think people, in striving to see themselves as source, will very often forget that there are many things that happen to us in life that are outside of our control.
Right.
And what we are responsible for is our consciousness in response to the meaning that we're making and how we're responding. So how we're interpreting life, how we're responding to life. And my favorite example of that is Nelson Mandela. So people were treating him like he was garbage. He was in prison. He was being degraded and devalued, and he held his dignity. And who was he in the face of that? And because of who he was in the face of that, he used that 26 years in prison to develop himself and prepare himself for the future that he stepped into, because he was ready to maximize the opportunity when he got out of prison.
And that's a level of ownership that is profound. So I want to repeat the same thing, but in just a slightly different way of viewing, at least for myself, is that when things happen that strike me as like not what I wanted, like, whoa, what is this? This isn't what I expected to happen. At the time, it often feels catastrophic. But we know, looking back at it, we often will go, wow, that was a gift. I'm not diminishing the hurt part and the sad part and the difficult part and the so forth and so on, but I want to own it fully. And I even want to own the grief about the loss of a marriage or the death of a loved one or whatever it is, a loss of a business. I don't want to, exclude. I want to embrace and become more intimate with these parts of my experience. I'm not looking to be in prison for 26 years, but I understand for Nelson Mandela, that was part of his path and journey. And to the degree he owned it, unbelievable what came out.
Well, and there's a relationship that you had to the loss. Or
Yeah.
There's a way that when we go from this is the worst thing that ever happened to me to this is the best thing that ever happened to me, it has everything to do with how we navigate that transition and that challenge. We are the ones who are holding our destiny in the palm of our hand. No one ever gets to say what our destiny is. So life will deal us these disappointments. It's not my fault that somebody lied to me.
Right.
That somebody showed up with, poor character. It's not necessarily my fault that I didn't see that coming. But it's my responsibility to go back and to review all the ways that maybe I skipped over my knowing.
Yeah.
I didn't ask the right questions because I didn't want to make trouble. I was overgiving and overcompensating, or I was taking too much responsibility and overfunctioning, or someone was underfunctioning. A lot of the places that we actually need to really self-examine are very, very subtle. But the important thing about doing that is unless we do that, as long as we stay victimized, we don't actually become trustworthy in order to create a new relationship.
Such a great point.
So we will not let ourselves go there again. If you get devastated like that, you don't want to ever go back into the lion's den again. You know those lions bite. You know that hurts. You don't ever have to go through that again. But what's different is that you need to be able to reflect upon how you yourself colluded in that dynamic and co-created and set it up, and as you're referring to, even baited somebody to play out that role for you, which is a very high level of objective, rational self-examination.
Sure.
So that you can really make an amends to yourself of growing yourself in the direction of never doing that again.
Yeah, and these pieces of us that came out and got expressed in these less than constructive ways, they're parts that are waiting to be healed. I mean, I believe that. These are these little fractured
You're talking
selves.
about the process so much. Let me just
let's talk about it. 5 weeks.
So
5 weeks or 5 years.
okay.
We're going to do 5 weeks.
Right, so
actually, we're going to do like 15 minutes.
Okay, we're going to do 15 minutes. That is the fast track of the conscious uncoupling process. Number one, you want to harness the energy of the emotions that you're in, that you're having, because the energy, they're like tidal waves. Hatred, rage, despair, hopelessness, all of these like huge feelings that feel like they're like burning our body up. I mean, when you get like quote unquote burned in love, there's like a physical sensation in your body. Your body actually feels like it's on fire.
Absolutely.
It's hard to go. It's like the most shattering experience. It's very,
you want to leap out of your own skin.
Is like
absolutely
broken and heavy, and the despair. So they're very, very big feelings, and you have to get deeper and wider than them and learn how to work with those emotions, because inside of the heart of those emotions is the energy of transformation. So unless you midwife them well, they're going to come out destructively. Rage, for instance. You have rage, and it's not in a deeper center where you're holding it from your, like, the depth of your soul inside of a committed relationship to your to yourself, where you're actually committing to your own life. You're setting an intention of what you're going to create out of this, what you're going to actually use this as an opportunity for.
A constructive expression. A constructive expression. Beautiful.
You're going to be able to harness the energy that's in that rage to unleash your own potentials for transformation, such that you never go back there and repeat those patterns again.
That's fantastic.
So as long as but you have to actually get deeper, wider. So there's like a whole series of exercises where I teach people how to do that, so that you can harness the energy of change that's in the center of the emotion. So that has to be the first week. It's finding emotional freedom.
Yeah.
The second week gets into what we were just looking into, reclaiming your power in your life. Now, once you self-reflect The reason why you want to self-reflect is not to blame and shame, or not to be a good new ager, or, not even to be a more conscious person because you know you should. It's to actually get your power back.
Yeah.
Because as long as you're victimized by the other person, what they did or they didn't do, you are at the effect of them. And until you can actually see how you participated in that dynamic and co-created that dynamic, you can't evolve into the person, the version of yourself you would need to be in order to open your heart up to love again.
That's fantastic.
So it's absolutely critical that you begin to see yourself as source, and you identify the areas where you need to grow and develop so that you can make an amends and start to show up differently from now on. The third week of the process is what we call breaking the pattern, healing your heart. And that's going back and recognizing that the break in your heart that you're feeling right now, this is not the first time this ever happened.
It's thematic.
It's thematic. And if you go back, you can trace that leg has broken before in that very exact same spot.
Yeah.
And that's the betrayal. That's the shock of a breakup. Because here you are, you're walking around with this wound that's not quite healed from your youth. And when you were much younger, you meet somebody, you think that person's going to fix this. You actually put them in the role of they're going to be the physician. They're going to finally make this better. And they go from Jesus to Judas in 5 seconds flat. Because now you've let them in, you've taken them into your heart and into your psyche, into your bed, and all of a sudden now they're behaving in the same way and hurting you in the same way.
If a woman really could love me enough, there's this fantasy part of me that feels I'd be healed. Right. And there actually is some truth in that, but it's not at the level that I've ever been willing to meet it before. It has to do with being spiritually naked and emotionally open with someone, because we've built to the place and we've broken down enough walls, and enough of those constructs of who we are have come apart, because that's what happens in life. And we've made it to that place.
It's a paradox, because all of these stories actually do heal in relationship with other people.
That's it.
All beliefs are relational in nature.
Yes.
They were formed in relationship with our caregivers.
Yeah.
And the evolution of beliefs actually happen in a relational field. So there is a truth to that. But very often what we've been trying to do is get someone else to give us what we ourselves will not give.
Well, that's
to
the critical
ourselves.
piece, is that the self that comes in, the higher self, the ability to come in and really take ownership and have that observer and have what you're talking about, which are the practices, so that we really have a place to go with the parts of us that need to be expressed. Look, they're coming out one way or another, consciously or unconsciously. These hurts, they're either leaking out or leaping out. We just assume put them someplace where we go, this is the expression of the part of me. Right?
Right. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So the third week of the conscious uncoupling process is going back to what we call the source fracture. And it's really looking at that story and starting to understand yourself as the source of that story, how you baited somebody to replay that story, how this happened through you. It just occurs for us like life is just kind of randomly happening. Maybe there's some angels up there with pallets, and they're saying, Katherine has a belief that she is not loved, so I'm just going to send her people that don't love her or incapable of love, like with the big cigar, torturing me. I'm like victimized by my own consciousness all the time. Right. So it's like really getting clear about how is this literally happening through me?
Yes.
How am I baiting people to not love me? Oh, I see. I'm never vulnerable with anybody. I'm a know-it-all all the time. Nobody can ever really get in and find their way into my world. I see, like, if you start to see yourself at that level, like, who am I being? How am I relating in a way that's so frustrating to somebody who actually wanted to love me and couldn't make their way into my world, and ended up somehow set up, finding themselves behaving in very unloving ways. And I know we know that because we've had that experience where we feel set up by somebody else's consciousness. It's in the invisible, it's in the unspoken. Then they're victimized.
And over a long period of time, again, with my wife and I, we can watch these. Like, it's very funny. Like, oh, that's one of the dances we do. Oh, we're doing that. She's doing Punisher, I'm doing Victim. You really want to do that? Sure, why not? How long do we want to go down that road?
Yes, I want to be a victim. Give me 5 minutes of victim.
Given time, I'll find a way to make this about you. Just give me time. We'll make it.
Oh, you guys got it down to 3.
We got it down to 3.
You're very conscious.
5 minutes, no, we can do it in 3. But the idea of skipping ahead through this whole scripted experience in our consciousness, going, oh, I know what the end story is, and actually unwinding it enough so we're not just replaying the same script again and again and again.
So it's going back and looking at the meaning that we made in that source fracture. So something happened.
The meaning that we assign to it.
I'm
the interpretation that we assign to it.
Other
Got it.
people
Yes, of course.
I can never get what I need
Brilliant.
from other people. Right?
Brilliant.
So like actually going back there and looking at that and course correcting that consciousness. No, actually what happened is you had a mother who was immature and a father who was mentally ill. And that's like a sad, tragic thing.
Right.
But that's what was happening.
Yeah.
And has nothing to do with whether you're lovable or not lovable. Right?
Yeah.
So we know that as
Absolutely.
grown-ups. So it's going back and course correcting. And then it's starting to live from the deeper truth and starting to align your behavior. So we're actually resetting the wound at the very source of the fracture. That's week 3 of the course. Then week 4 of the conscious uncoupling process is what we call, I just want to get this right, becoming a love alchemist. That's where you start to cause high magic.
That's fantastic.
That's where you can actually
That's
start
fantastic.
to clear the field of the karma between yourself and your former partner. You actually write the relationship in a very, very deep way. You actually clear, all the resentments from the I have exercises that are like magical. It's high magic. It's becoming a generator of life and love. It's making a decision like who you are in the face of this. Are you going to be victimized? Are you going to be contracted? Are you going to go into a smaller place? Or are you going to like rise to the occasion and start to generate love and accept what someone else's reality, accept the choices that they're making, and then start to create love in the field, like cohesion, well-being. So it's a powerful.
And I want to say something about this because, again, Barnet and I have spoken a lot about this, that we have to have a sense of what we want, that we're projecting forward. Not maybe in strict terms, like it has to look a particular way, but the essence and the quality of it that we can go and find expression of, that we're actually generating. Because if we don't have a vision for where we're going, then unfortunately we are doomed to keep replaying a pattern.
And that's one of the challenges of a breakup is you actually are grieving your lost vision.
Yes.
And you're not really ready to create a new one yet very often. So that's actually why we're getting lost in a breakup, because we don't want a new love. I mean, it's like maybe theoretically we do, but we want that person. We want that love. Our heart is broken because we just lost that future.
That's the stuck on the supposed tos. It was supposed to be a certain way. It ought tos and the should haves, and all of that is suffering. Suffering is all of that.
It's
the should haves,
holding the complexity of the grief.
Yes.
And to be able, going back to week 1, the intention that you set, how this is going to go, to still be a generator of life and of love in the face of heartache and heartbreak. That is the marking of a true co-creator with life, a true mature person. So that's an amazing week. And so we give you the tools, exactly what to do and how to do that, to begin to create cohesion and well-being for yourself and for everyone involved in this. Then the 5th week of the conscious uncoupling process, creating your happily even after life. And that has to do with bringing cohesion into the whole relational matrix that's been impacted. And when you were talking before about agreements with your wife, you had different agreements with her.
Right.
We also have agreements in the community, who we are as a couple. We're the couple that everyone looks to as a role model. We're the couple that, always is the life of the party. There's a whole relational matrix that every couple exists in. And it's
there's all these couples in love with other couples. There's all these ways in which we've surrounded ourselves in a community that gets fractured. I know that.
Gets fractured.
Yeah.
So to actually bring cohesion to that and to let people know, to make conscious the assumptions that people have inside of, how do you deal with your children? So there's ritual. Sometimes people do a conscious uncoupling ritual, but you can just as easily do kind of a ritual where maybe you have a dinner party with the people in your inner circle that you love. After the divorce is final, you raise a toast. You say, I just want to toast and thank my former partner for all that many happy years we had together, to honor the time we spent together, to thank and bless his life, her life.
That is so valuable.
And have everybody cheer to it. And
well, it's a reframe.
It's
It's a new agreement about how we're going to be with this, so that it frees everybody else up. Because look, I said 1999, but I just recently contacted an old mutual friend of my wife and I's, who I love this guy. He's a wonderful friend, and we were such good friends. And I lost track of him after the divorce, because this is what happens.
Right.
And I just recently contacted him, and I just felt like, this is crazy, but I still feel like he's still not sure if he can be my friend because he's still her friend.
Exactly.
I swear to you, that just happened maybe 3 months ago.
And this is the
Brutal.
norm. And we have to start behaving in a much more conscious way.
You bet.
And who's impacted the most is our children.
Yeah, of course.
They really are.
Of course.
They're so burdened by it. And so all these statistics on how damaged children are from divorce, I'm not sure it needs to be that way.
No, not at all.
I don't think it needs to be that way. I mean, parenthood requires a huge commitment before and after divorce. So you effort cohesion, you effort well-being, you effort what we call an expanded, extended family.
And helping the kids with a constructive interpretation. Here's the problem. We've run out of time. We got to do 15 shows. I mean, this is never going to end. All right, here's what I want to do. Folks, the website again is www.artofconsciouscompletion.com. I urge you to go there. Let folks know who are going through these challenges about this work, because this is monumental. Katherine, I am so grateful to you for coming on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Freeman. It's always a joy to be with you.
And thank you all for listening. I invite you to keep coming back and share this with friends. Thanks for listening to Cutting Edge Consciousness.